A young lady watches as the shuttle lands, waiting outside the fenced-in area, waiting so intently and so excited about what and who she's going to see that her tail is actually wagging. Outside of the facility, the shuttle slowly comes to a rest and the doors slowly open. Afterwards, multiple people start walking out, and the young lady watches each person intently and just about squeals at the sight of a certain person. The man is wearing a uniform, with his face buried in his data pad, focusing primarily on that, yet somehow he's able to walk through the crowd. As he approaches a facility, he puts the data pad away, and just as he looks at the doors, just in time, he sees a young lady burst through the door so fast to greet him. She grabs him so fast that he has no time to react, and then picks him up and lifts him into the air as his face is buried inside her chest. He greets her calmly as he's barely able to speak. Yet once he does, he's asking her to put him down, as he is currently about 10 feet in the air with his feet just dangling on the ground. She realizes this and slowly lowers him back down, and once down, he checks himself to make sure he hasn't broken any bones, as she gave her idea of a real human hug. They make their way inside and meet up with everyone else. It's rather hectic inside, as supplies are being brought in and equipment is being stored, checked, and prepared. Every human knew what this meant. Something big was going to happen, but no one was saying anything. Not a word. Inside the facility, the colonel met with Susan and director, and they talked while walking, trying not to waste any time. While they walked, the young lady never left his side. It made Susan a bit jealous, but she tried to hide it, which she failed miserably. When they got to the infirmary, the colonel got to meet Doc. The male snake was working with the rest of the medical staff, yet he did stop and shake the colonel's hand. The doc explained how he had come to appreciate his treatment while he was there. He believed that he'd be tortured for information, killed, and probably eaten while he was still alive. Now he had learned so much more of the medical techniques from humans that he was simply amazed and couldn't get enough. Also, he was teaching everybody about Kumblera tech. This had saved more than one life so far, which made the colonel smile. Though he was very careful not to show his teeth, just in case. As they left the infirmary, the young lady continued to keep her arms attached to the colonel. He didn't mind. Something soft, or two somethings soft, pushing against his arm was quite pleasant. To play along, he wrapped his arm around her waist and guided her back out the door when it was time to leave. He could hear Doc say something, but it was a bit too low for the translator to pick up. Later on, as they ended up having lunch, the entire room jumped to attention as the colonel walked in, as soon as they heard, "Room, attention!" As you were. Everyone seemed to relax and go back down at that point, but this jump seemed to frighten the young lady, but also made her hold him even tighter, as though she was not only scared, but more interested. The colonel had to tell her, "Sweetheart, could you ease up a little bit? I can no longer feel my hand." Embarrassed, she loosened up, but didn't let go. While inside the DFAC, also known as the dining facility, they met up with one of the other male snakes. Turns out, he wanted to learn how humans prepare food. Cookie, as they call him, is just constantly upbeat as he gets to try all the new dishes almost every single day. There were a few items that he regretted trying. Of course, anything with capsaicin in it was not fun, although he found out that coffee had a different effect. Though flavorful, it put him into rut, and unfortunately at one point he had to be sedated. Though he can't drink it, he still enjoys the smell of it every morning as he comes in, and the first thing he does is ah. He also enjoyed working as a dishwasher a lot more than humans did, mainly due to the fact that it gives off a lot of heat, and their cold reptilian bodies just loved it. The biggest difference between the Columbra food and human food, they found out, was the fact that humans cooked almost everything. The heat, the spices, the tenderness, all combined to create an almost erotic experience. Hell, this became very obvious as the young lady didn't even cool her skillet before dumping it into her maw and straight down her throat, swallowing it pretty much in one go. Everyone thought she'd burn herself, but then they looked at her face, and the look on her face as her foot-long tongue lipped her lips was that of complete satisfaction. Any human that didn't see it before stopped and watched, and everyone kind of figured they had two things in mind. Ow, did that hurt? And that's a long tongue. Later that evening, the young lady posed a question. Looking longing in the colonel's eyes, she asked, "Will you fertilize me?" The colonel was absolutely shocked and didn't say anything as she began to bring her coils ever so closer. The colonel, finally pulling himself together, You want to have a child with me? I don't even know if that's possible. Also, why me when you have two other of your kind on this post?" She responded, "You are not just the one to save me when I was dying. You protected me from others that wanted to hurt me. Also, you are above others, so you can command others to do your bidding. They all respect and fear you." She began to blush a little bit as she continued, "I can tell by holding you that you are very strong. Any Columbra female would desire you as a mate, even if they were not fully bonded with you." At this point, her hands had gone underneath the top of his BDUs. The battle dress uniform was already starting to strain as her hands started to stretch out around his back. He wasn't really worrying about that, as he could already begin to feel her wrap around him, and while she did, her piercing eyes never left him. The colonel, taking a deep breath before speaking, "Again, I don't think that is possible." She tries to speak, but he interrupts her before she goes. "Have you ever taken an anatomy class on the human body? I mean, I doubt it. You see, my dear, our bodies are not designed similar enough in that respect. Even if we could get ourselves in the correct position, the damage I would do to you. Uh, Look, I wouldn't forgive myself if I caused you that much pain." The young lady flinched a little at the implication of what he was saying. Of course, any female would think about that sort of strain. Thankfully, Susan came in and took this moment to interrupt. "He's right. No matter how we run the numbers, something is going to tear, and not in a fun way." The young lady was not sure what made her more upset, the fact that she was just interrupted by another female, or the compassion side of the colonel. He was no longer being the colonel, the strong man that she knew, but someone who actually cared, which was a total inversion of the character that she thought. But a bit of discussion, and they agreed to the following. Since the colonel was leaving in the morning, she could sleep in the same bed as him. That is, sleep, nothing else. Of course, she sleeps in the same bed as Susan all the time, so there should not be a problem with her, coiling him up and accidentally squeezing him out at night. When he leaves, and of course after he returns, if she still wants to attempt procreation, they have two options. The first option is if she's been checked and that is assuming that there are any exercises that would even allow mating to occur without causing harm, serious harm especially, they could try. Option two, if she cannot adjust herself, they can still try procreation without mating. Thinking about this, both the young lady and Susan simultaneously said, "Oh, how boring." When the young lady said the colonel could go through reduction surgery for himself, he simply responded, "Yeah, that's not happening." The next morning, the young lady watched the shuttle leave and just watched the skies for about an hour before going back inside. The colonel had enjoyed his visit, as he was able to hang out with friends and deal with a few small issues, but now it was time to get his head back in the game, because the game was about to start. The operation began just a few more days later, and as all the ships lined up near the seventh planet orbit, even though that seventh planet was on the other side of the system, from there they could jump to the next sector without issue. On the bridge of the lead dreadnought, the Sword of Retribution, the colonel watched as the admiral commanded the fleet. With practiced precision, every station performed their roles flawlessly, to the point the colonel believed that he might be in a holographic simulation. The fleet, unfortunately, would have to jump in groups, as too much interference from too many ships could cause issues. And trust everybody when they say, during a jump, you don't want issues. Upon entering the system, the first group proceeded with opening up communications. By hailing the enemy forces, they could facilitate the upload and the data pulse. Before the opposing side even knew what the hell is going on, their ships already started to go dark. If one was to look at the sector from way out in space, they would see from where the humans were all the way to the other side of the sector, it was like a dam had broken, and every time water pushed over, something went dark. A ship, a station, a planet. They had all begun to malfunction and shut down. And as ships began to go adrift, a single image was sent out across the system. A single Columbus ship was able to get a single image of the approaching force. And out of desperation, they decided to put it in a data package and get it ready to be sent out, believing that they could send it out faster than they could travel. Good thing, too, because as their ship began to malfunction, the captain had slammed on the release, and it was able to release just less than a second before the systems all shut down. The picture that was sent did not see the entire fleet. It only saw the first wave, which consisted of a single cruiser, 6 destroyers, 8 frigates, most of which were set up for cyber warfare, and 17 corvettes. It was not a large force by anyone's metric. The size of the ships gave them away, yet they seemed blocky, yet sleek, obviously covered with point defense cannons. Each of them clearly had fixed emplacements on their bow and no visible sign of propulsion, meaning that they're pretty advanced, as you don't need fusion drives. Along with that, on the mid-range to larger ships, they would see turrets, lots of turrets, mounted on the dorsal, ventral, port, and starboard sides. These were not point defense turrets, though. Though unclear if they were energy or ballistic based, it was still clear that they were designed to go nose to nose with ships above their weight class. The last of the enemy ships began to go adrift as some began to tumble into whatever gravity wells close by. Though few, there are some escape pods that are launched, but most don't get far before getting pulled down into the darkness themselves as their own systems begin to malfunction and end up tumbling towards the gravity wells. On the primary planet of the system, everybody was confused at images that showed something on their devices. They weren't sure what they were looking at least until the devices began to overload and shut down and there wasn't an image to look at. Very quickly, all the power grids began to fail. All of them, didn't matter what size. This immediately caused mass confusion everywhere. Shutting down all life support functions to those aboard any type of colony or any type of station was devastating and made everyone panic. Although on the planets, it made everyone look outside to figure out what the hell was going on. Within minutes, they had a pretty good idea, as they could see their own ships begin to tumble and burn through the atmosphere before crashing into massive fireballs that looked like small nuclear explosions. The few systems they had that were not connected to any type of communications grid or anything like that were immune to being infected by the human malware, and they began to signal. None of the Columbra believed anything like this could even possibly happen, and hastily they began to prepare for what might be coming, though they didn't have long. Within a minute of the first ship crashing into the ground, strange metal devices began to crash into the ground around the planet, some releasing gas that made the Columbra cover their faces in disgust and pain, as it was like they just dove their face into some sort of sewage dump that was covered in some sort of burning fluid. Other pods released something even worse. The armored bipeds burst out and began to clear the planet. Any snake perceived as a threat was simply gunned down before they could even strike. The gas made it impossible for the snakes to use many of their senses. This led to many getting captured as they thrashed around on the ground, trying desperately to breathe in deeper or to get any of the gas out of their eyes. One of the ones pinned down to the ground, as a very large piece of metal was put in their face, looked up and saw this creature above them. In desperation, the snake reached around with his tail towards the metal neck of this bipod that he saw in front of him in an attempt to throw it off. The moment his tail began to wrap around the head of this thing was the last moment he ever had. There was a loud burst of fire and lead as the Columbra no longer had a head. The body stayed on the ground thrashing for a long time as the biped simply moved on. Across the primary M-class planet in the system, metal boots busted down doorways and walls, dragging civilians to the center of town, though not killing them off completely. The military tried to put up a fight, but quickly found out that these mechanical bipeds were made out of very strong material, mostly metal, and it seemed like every section of them were weapons. Cannons on the shoulders, missiles that came out of their backs, sometimes their arms. Along with that, massive ballistic and energy weapons were carried on them at all times, and it seemed like they had backup weapons for everything. And this wasn't even utilizing the huge piles of burning plasma to clear structures, and then they had a huge cannon that they carried with them already. Though the warrior class's honor would not let them surrender, many of them paused and stopped and saw that these bipeds had so much capacity for destruction and simply froze at this, especially when they saw their own leader get tore apart by ballistic shells. They didn't know what to do as they needed leadership, and next thing they knew, one of the bipeds would be standing in front of them, either holding a large piece of metal, holding up their arm with a weapon primed. One of the shoulder weapons will be aiming straight at them, or worse yet, the plasma weapon will be pointed at them as a strange flame came out the front. They would pause at this point and wait for the response. Many of the warriors, especially the young ones, realized that there was no point in just giving up their lives needlessly. Without using any orbital bombardment, it took the human forces only 3 weeks to clear 2 planets, 3 moons, 2 space stations, 6 colonies, 37 ships. Well, there would have been more, but the remainder of them had been sucked down to the planets and moons before the humans had got to them, which meant they missed out on another 49 ships. All in all, it was a good haul, considering there was only 2 human casualties. One from the drop, which was a simple misdrop, and one from combat, but of course he would survive as all he did was twist something. As the fleet took care of salvage, all the surviving snakes were taken to a holding area on the primary world. Those taken believed that they would be tortured and killed. They were surprised to find food, shelter, medical, and even some comfort items brought for them. It was astounding. They also believed they would be taken to some barren land, but no, the area they were brought to was very, very fruitful. Plenty of animals moving around, flora and fauna in all directions. There was barely any fences, just a few barricades with something written in their own language that said, "Do not cross wire." They were surprised. Within the holding area, the Columbus still thought they were surrounded by robots. That is until a large stage was erected with a screen that was set up. In front of them, the colonel walked up and addressed them. As he talked, the mechanical voice of the translator came out. You need not fear us. We are not like you. We do not feed on our prisoners. As long as you listen to our instructions, you will be returned to your people at the earliest opportunity. You have my word, and the word of every human. With that, everyone there began to remove the heavy helmets from their suits to show their faces to their now prisoners. Everyone in the crowd was still shocked. One of the youngest ones, one of the warrior caste, actually screamed up, yelled, You can't be humans! Humans are dead! Trying to keep from smiling, the colonel looked down at him and said, The word of our demise has been greatly exaggerated.